Captain Thomas Hayes strode confidently through the sterile, brightly lit corridors of the Galactic Medical Complex, his eyes scanning the bizarre sight before him. Aliens of every imaginable species shuffled or hovered through the halls, all in various stages of treatment or examination. A six-legged Yalari was being fitted with a new exoskeleton in one corner, while a jelly-like Zoglum floated in a suspended tank next to an irritated-looking medical technician. Thomas was used to standing out. As a human, he was one of the rare Deathworlders organisms from planets classified as incredibly hostile to life. Earth was a particularly infamous death world, with its intense gravity, volatile weather, and the baffling array of dangers the planet casually threw at its inhabitants. But being here, at a state-of-the-art galactic hospital, he felt more like a zoo exhibit than an officer in the Terran space fleet. He could sense eyes on him, though most of the aliens avoided direct contact. He shrugged. After years of exploration, combat, and generally getting into the kinds of trouble that only humans seemed capable of surviving, Thomas was here for something mundane, a routine checkup. The fleet insisted that every few months, every captain underwent a health evaluation to ensure their fitness for duty, and since he happened to be stationed near Solera 9, home of the finest alien medical care in the quadrant, this was where his appointment had been scheduled. Thomas didn't mind the physicals. He could take a hit better than most, thanks to years of training and an almost laughable tolerance for pain. He had even broken his leg on a mission once and hadn't realized it until hours later. To him, this was just another box to check before getting back to work. What was the worst that could happen? He made his way to the front desk, where a long-necked, turquoise-skinned receptionist peered down at him with wide, curious eyes. "Captain Thomas Hayes," he said, offering a grin as he handed over his fleet identification, "here for a checkup." The receptionist blinked slowly, her vertical pupils dilating as she took in the sight of him. "Ah yes, Captain Hayes," she replied, her voice a strange combination of clicks and vowels that the universal translator processed easily. "Human. Deathworlder. Fascinating. We don't often see your kind here." "Yeah, I get that a lot," Thomas replied, leaning on the counter casually. "So, where do I go?" "Room 7, she said, handing back his ID. "Dr. Zalra will be attending to you." With a nod, Thomas walked away, oblivious to the murmurs and whispers that followed him down the corridor. Dr. Zalra was a member of the Serani species, a delicate and bird-like race known for their precision in medical practices. She was small, even for a Serani, with light pink feathers framing her large, expressive eyes. Her wings twitched nervously as Thomas entered the examination room. "Captain Hayes, welcome," she said, her voice melodious but tinged with the slightest hint of apprehension. "I understand you're here for your routine medical evaluation." "That's right," Thomas said, settling into the examination chair that seemed a bit too small for him. He noticed the room was pristine, with advanced equipment he could barely identify and several displays that hummed with information in a language he couldn't read. Zalra fluttered her wings again, adjusting the scanning device she was holding. "If you'll remain still, I will begin with a standard biometric scan. This will only take a moment." Thomas nodded and sat back. The scanner buzzed to life, passing over him in slow, deliberate sweeps. He could feel the device's slight warmth as it captured data on his body composition, muscle density, and internal organ functions. It was all pretty standard procedure. At least he thought it was. The first hint that something was off came when the scanner emitted a loud beep and shut down abruptly. Zalra frowned, tapping the device with her clawed fingers. "That's odd," she muttered, adjusting it and running the scan again. Another beep. Another shutdown. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay, Doc?" "I don't know," Zalra admitted, her eyes narrowing as she reset the scanner for a third attempt. "It appears that the biometric scanner cannot process your data. I'll have to recalibrate." She moved swiftly to her console, her talons clicking against the floor as she input a series of commands. Thomas waited patiently, more amused than concerned. "Let's try this again," she said, returning with a more advanced-looking device. She passed it over his body, the scan taking longer this time as the device seemed to strain to comprehend what it was reading. And then it beeped. Zalra's feathers puffed in a display of shock. "This can't be right," she said softly. Thomas sat up straighter. What do you mean? Your body, Zalra stammered, her eyes darting between the scanner and the readout on the screen. She cut herself off, clearly unsure of how to proceed. Your bone density, muscle mass, organ resilience. Everything is far beyond standard sentient parameters. Well, I am from Earth, Thomas said with a grin. We're kind of known for being tough. Zalra stared at him, her feathers trembling. Captain Hayes, this isn't a matter of toughness. By galactic standards, your body should not be able to function. Thomas blinked. Come again. Your bones have the density of starship hull plating, Zalra exclaimed. Your muscle fibers are practically unterrible. And your internal organs are somehow capable of withstanding pressures that would liquefy most other sentient species. Thomas scratched his chin. Thanks. The doctor didn't seem amused. She glanced nervously at the scanner, then back at Thomas, as if contemplating whether to call for backup. Doctor, look, Thomas said, trying to calm her down. This is normal for humans. We've evolved to survive some pretty harsh conditions. Zalra looked at him as if he'd just sprouted a second head. Normal? This is normal? Captain Hayes, these readings suggest you should have perished countless times under the environmental stressors your body is exposed to daily. And yet, she gestured helplessly to him. You are sitting here perfectly healthy. It's incomprehensible. Thomas laughed. Yeah, I get that a lot. Zalra didn't laugh. Instead, she turned to her console, pulling up more detailed scans of Thomas's vital systems. She zoomed in on his cardiovascular system, her eyes widening in horror as the image resolved into a clear display of his heart. Your heart should have collapsed under the gravitational pressure of Earth years ago, she exclaimed. I assure you it works just fine, Thomas replied, still grinning. Your entire circulatory system, how does it handle the stress of pumping blood through such dense tissue? Thomas shrugged. We're built for it. Zalra's feathers twitched again, and she muttered something in her native tongue before quickly switching to another set of scans. This time she focused on his nervous system, then his skeletal structure, then back to his organs. Each scan only seemed to confirm her growing disbelief. It's no wonder humans have such a reputation, she murmured, almost to herself. Your species is a scientific anomaly. I prefer miracle of evolution, but sure, Thomas said, winking. Zalra didn't seem to find it funny. She stared at him for a long moment, before setting the scanner down and pacing back and forth in short, frantic steps. The beeping of the machines filled the silence. I need to run more tests, she said abruptly. Thomas raised an eyebrow. More tests? Why? Because I need to understand how your body functions, Zalra replied, her voice trembling with excitement and perhaps a bit of fear. This could rewrite everything we know about physiology. I need to take a full neural scan, a genetic sample, a complete metabolic analysis. Thomas held up his hands. Whoa, slow down, Doc. It's just a checkup. I don't think all of that is necessary. Zalra froze mid-step, her eyes narrowing as if she had just heard the most baffling thing in the galaxy. Captain Hayes, you don't understand. Your body defies every known biological law we have. If I don't run these tests, it could be a loss to science, galactic science. Thomas smirked. Yeah, but see, I really don't have time for an alien science experiment today. I've got places to be, and if you haven't noticed, I'm in perfect health. Zalra looked like she might implode from frustration. But how? How can your species possibly be in perfect health when your environment is designed to kill you? Good old-fashioned human adaptability, Thomas replied with a grin. We don't just survive, Doc, we thrive. Zalra's feathers puffed out again, but this time she didn't argue. She stared at him for a long moment, then sighed, her wings drooping in resignation. I will need to consult with my colleagues, she said quietly, her eyes never leaving the screen. This is beyond me. Thomas stood up, stretching his arms. Hey, you're not the first alien to be confused by humans. Won't be the last either. By the time Thomas left the examination room, he felt more like a walking curiosity than a patient. Every alien he passed seemed to give him a wide berth, whispering to each other in their strange languages as they watched him walk by. He had no doubt Zalra had already shared her findings with half the medical staff. He made his way toward the exit, feeling the weight of dozens of curious eyes on his back. but instead of being uncomfortable, he found it amusing. Earth may have been classified as a death world, but for humans, it was home. If anything, the galaxy just needed to catch up to the idea that deathworlders like him weren't going anywhere. Unbeknownst to Thomas, Zalra was already in a frenzied discussion with several senior medical specialists in the depths of the galactic medical complex. They pored over the readings, comparing them to the databases of countless species, each finding more questions than answers. Human, Zalra muttered, staring at the incomprehensible results. How do they even exist? But the more they analyzed the data, the more the answer became clear. Humans didn't just exist, they thrived. Even when the galaxy couldn't understand how. Dr. Zalra paced back and forth in the high-tech lab deep within the galactic medical complex, feathers twitching erratically as she and her colleagues hovered over Thomas's scan results. The room was filled with holographic displays showing various cross-sections of Thomas's body, and every single one of them painted a picture that bordered on the absurd. Bone density readings spiked off the charts, muscle fibers appeared nearly indestructible, and his neural pathways were firing at speeds that seemed impossible for an organic being. The other Serani in the room, along with several highly regarded physicians from other species, were equally baffled. This cannot be right, muttered Dr. Varrock, a Zalonian specialist who had a reputation for never being surprised by anything. His translucent skin was glowing a pale yellow, a sign of extreme agitation for his kind. He flicked his many tendrils toward a set of readings. His neural system should have short-circuited under Earth's gravity alone, and yet it's operating as if he's in 0G. Zalra nodded fervently. I know. I've run the scans multiple times. Each time it's the same. It's as if the laws of biology don't apply to him. An older Ivorian physician, Dr. Glorin, clicked his beak in disapproval. And what about his immune system? Have you seen this? He gestured to a display showing a live analysis of Thomas's white blood cells. These cells are not only unusually aggressive, but they've adapted to counter thousands of pathogens in an incredibly short time frame. His immune system is operating like it's perpetually at war, and yet it doesn't appear to be overworked. He's from Earth, Zalra said, as if that explained everything. It's a death world. Their bodies are constantly under threat, so they've adapted to handle dangers no other species could. This is beyond adaptation, Varrock said, his voice raising slightly in incredulity. His entire physiology should be collapsing under the strain of such pressures. It's as if he's been engineered. Engineered by what? Evolution, Dr. Glorin scoffed. Even evolution can't explain this. It's as if their biology is in a permanent state of hyper-preparedness. How could a species develop to survive conditions like this? Zalra took a deep breath, her mind racing. We're missing something. There has to be more to this. We've studied deathworlder physiology in theory, but this is the first time we've had a specimen in such detail. I think we need to consider the possibility that. Suddenly, one of the hovering drones nearby emitted a sharp, high-pitched beep. A new analysis of Thomas's DNA sequence had finished processing, and the results began scrolling rapidly across the holographic display. Zalra's eyes widened. Look at this, she shouted, pointing to the genetic readout, his DNA. It's in constant repair mode. There are nearly no signs of cellular decay. His telomeres are almost fully intact, Varrock interrupted, astonished. This is unheard of. Glorin snapped his beak shut, staring at the data in disbelief. Humans are effectively immortal. Zalra shook her head. No, not immortal. But their bodies have an ability to repair damage and resist aging in ways we've never seen before. This is why they can survive in such an extreme environment. Their biology doesn't just react, it anticipates. That's impossible, Glorin snapped, though his voice wavered slightly. No species is that resilient. And yet, Zalra said, looking back at the readings, he's walking proof. Meanwhile, Thomas wandered through the hospital complex, trying to make his way back to the docking bay. He'd been in plenty of alien facilities before, but this place was a labyrinth. The signs, though translated by his ocular implant, were still hard to follow. Most of the hallways looked the same, endless white corridors filled with unfamiliar sounds and strange equipment. The occasional alien patient or doctor would glance his way, their wide eyes often lingering on him a second too long. He couldn't help but feel like he was the subject of some weird experiment. His mind wandered back to Zalra's reaction earlier, her complete disbelief at what was, to him, just standard human biology. It was funny, in a way. Sure, humans had evolved to handle some extreme conditions, but that was just how life on Earth worked. Harsh gravity, unpredictable weather, volcanic activity, predatory animals, toxins in the air, all just another day on the home planet. Thomas chuckled to himself as he rounded a corner. He could only imagine the look on Zalra's face if she found out about some of the other things humans had survived, like that time his friend Luke had casually walked away from a venomous bite from a xenoraptor on a jungle moon because he'd had worse. The memory was cut short as Thomas found himself in what looked like a massive atrium. It was bustling with medical personnel and patients, but what caught his attention was a large cylindrical machine in the center of the room. It hummed with energy, glowing faintly. A group of doctors, all in light blue medical garb, were huddled around the machine, looking concerned. Without thinking, Thomas walked over. One of the doctors, a towering insectoid with gleaming black chitin, noticed him and did a double take. "Human," the doctor said, his antennae twitching nervously. "What are you doing here?" "Just trying to find my way out," Thomas said with a grin. "What's going on with this thing? Looks like it's about to blow a fuse." The insectoid doctor hesitated, clearly unsure of how much to reveal. "This is a stasis pod. It malfunctioned. We have a critically ill patient inside, and the pod is supposed to be keeping him stable. But the containment field is failing. If it collapses, the patient will." "Why not just fix the field generator?" Thomas asked, stepping closer to get a better look at the machine. "We tried," the doctor said, exasperated. "But the system won't respond, and none of our tools are working fast enough to prevent total failure." Thomas rubbed his chin. "Mind if I take a look?" The insectoid doctor blinked his large, compound eyes. What could a human possibly? "Hey, just trust me," Thomas said with a confident smile. "We Deathworlders know a thing or two about keeping things running in life or death situations." The doctor seemed to falter, glancing back at the stasis pod. There wasn't much time. Finally, with a click of his mandibles, he stepped aside. Thomas crouched by the machine, popping open a panel near its base. Inside was a mess of circuitry and wiring, and a large generator core that was clearly overheating. He reached into his belt pouch, pulling out a small tool that looked like a cross between a wrench and a laser cutter. "Okay," Thomas muttered to himself, scanning the wiring. "Looks like you've got a problem with the thermal regulator here. It's been fried by the feedback loop. I've seen this kind of thing happen in plasma engines before." The doctors exchanged glances, not understanding a word of what he was saying. Thomas didn't care. He was in his element now. With swift precision, he disconnected a series of wires, rerouted power away from the core, and created a manual bypass for the cooling system. After a few tense minutes, the generator stopped its ominous humming. The stasis field flickered, then stabilized. Thomas stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. "There. Should hold long enough for you to get a new regulator installed." The insectoid doctor stared at him in disbelief. "How did you?" "Just a little improvisation," Thomas said with a wink. "Sometimes all you need is some good old human ingenuity." But before the doctor could respond, an alert went off on one of the nearby consoles. Several other doctors rushed over to check it, and Thomas could hear them muttering in their respective languages. Something was wrong. "What's happening?" Thomas asked, stepping closer. "The patient inside the stasis pod," one of the doctors said. "He's waking up. The field's supposed to keep him in a comatose state until we can perform the necessary surgery. But..." Thomas didn't wait for the doctor to finish. He sprinted toward the pod just as it began to open, releasing a hiss of cold air. Inside was a massive figure, an alien covered in thick, gray scales with piercing orange eyes. The creature looked disoriented at first, but as soon as it saw the doctors, it let out a low, menacing growl. Is this guy supposed to be friendly?" Thomas asked, taking a step back. "He's not," the insectoid doctor shouted. "He's a Gorthan. Highly aggressive. The sedation didn't take." Before anyone could react, the Gorthan lunged out of the stasis pod, roaring in fury. It towered over everyone in the room, its muscles rippling beneath its scaly hide. The doctors scattered in panic, some calling for security, others fleeing the scene entirely. Thomas, however, didn't move. He locked eyes with the Gorthan, his instincts kicking in. This wasn't the first time he'd faced down an enraged alien predator, and it sure as hell wouldn't be the last. All right, big guy, Thomas said, rolling up his sleeves. You want to do this the hard way, huh? The Gorthon snarled, swinging one massive arm toward Thomas, its claws aimed to rip him apart. But Thomas was faster. He ducked under the swipe, grabbing the alien's arm and using its momentum to slam it into the ground with a loud thud. The Gorthon roared in surprise, but Thomas didn't let up. He jumped onto its back, locking his arms around its thick neck in a chokehold. The creature thrashed wildly, trying to shake him off, but Thomas held on, tightening his grip. The doctors watched in stunned silence as the human barely half the size of the Gorthon somehow managed to subdue the rampaging alien. It took a few more moments of struggling, but eventually the Gorthon's strength waned, and it collapsed unconscious onto the floor. Thomas stood up, dusting himself off as he looked down at the unconscious creature. "See, Doc," he said, breathing heavily. "I told you humans thrive in extreme conditions." Hours later, Thomas finally made it back to the docking bay, still grinning from ear to ear. He could imagine the stories the hospital staff would be telling for weeks about the crazy human who fixed their stasis pod and took down a Gorthon single-handedly. As he approached his ship, his comm unit buzzed. It was Zalra. "Captain Hayes," she said, her voice calm but tinged with the same disbelief she had shown earlier. "I've consulted with several of my colleagues and we've come to the conclusion that your physiology is a mystery. There's nothing in the galactic medical database that can explain how your body functions under such extreme conditions." Thomas laughed, stepping onto his ship's ramp. "Well, Doctor, I guess humans are just full of surprises." "That's one way of putting it," Zalra replied, sounding exasperated but amused. "I suspect we'll be studying your data for a long time to come." "You do that," Thomas said, leaning back against the doorframe. "And if you ever need a demonstration, you know where to find me." Zalra paused, then chuckled softly. "I'll keep that in mind, Captain. Safe travels." Thomas closed the comm and glanced back at the sprawling medical complex. It had been a routine checkup, all right, just not the kind he'd expected. With one last grin, he powered up his ship and blasted off into the stars. Another day, another galaxy left speechless.